Hello there, Kaos Nova here, and this is another episode of Battle Angel Alita lore. Now, as I had in a preview earlier, what is Zalem? Okay, or in the manga it also goes by Tiphares, for Tigris and Euphrates, and it's a city held up in the sky from something in space, presumably, that lies way above it, and it's something that people, obviously, if you've seen the basic media for Battle Angel Alita, you know that a lot of people covet it. A lot of people want to go up to it, or go back, or some people want to go back to it. And you know that Doc Ito, at least in the case of every media, Doc Ito or Dr. Daisuke Dyson in the live-action movie came from there. Or, as you see in the live-action anime movies, there was also a love interest of Dr. Ito named Shirin, who came from there. And, okay, contrary to what you see in the live-action movie, because the animated film completely left this character out, there is Destiny Nova, a overarching villain in the Battle Angel Alita series, who came from Zalem as well. Now, the big thing is here, okay, what is the secret? So, my warning here is there's a lot of spoilers if you haven't gotten far enough in the manga, or far enough in the video game, which is pretty rare nowadays. It was essentially only released in Japanese back in 1998, but there have been, thanks to modding efforts, there is an English translation of the game. And I do live stream the English translation from time to time, so you can go check that part out. In the meantime, this is just a thing that if you see the animated film or the live-action film, this is spoilers that go beyond what you see covered in those media, so you have been warned. But if you don't mind spoilers and you don't mind knowing more about this incredible element of sci-fi that happens to be in manga, then proceed. Now, if you watch the film, or rather short film, in these special features for Alita Battle Angel, called Alita's World: The Fall, you'll see a very quick glance of what is up in space, going down to the ground. You see, if you slow it down, you see there's this big structure up in space that is connected down to whatever is down below. Zalem, actually. This is going off what you found in the original manga, not in Last Order. In Last Order, it's a bit different, but in the original manga, you had what's called Jeru, or in Last Order they call it Ketheres, or Ketheres, that is the city up in orbit, way above Zalem, but it's connected by a massive space or orbital elevator from geosynchronous orbit. In the original manga, it was a case of it being a giant flower in space, and these petals, which I'll describe to you in a little bit, are actually something else. They're not just flower petals. So in Battle Angel Alita, you're probably wondering, okay, did they go beyond our solar system? This is the 25th or 26th century, and the answer is they wanted to, but it was unfortunately cut short in those plans by wars, by the terraforming wars, as they're known in the manga, or as known in the supplementary material for Alita Battle Angel and the special features of the film, whether it's a Blu-ray or the digital film off Amazon, or whatever format you get it in, it is known as The Fall. So there was an idea in the manga that they were going to go make interstellar travel. Now, this is not like Star Trek. This is not like Star Wars. They didn't have a way to get from point A to point B faster than the speed of light, or faster than light would go from point A to point B. Because in Star Trek or Star Wars, you're going through another dimension by warp drive or hyperspace. You go into another dimension and you come out of that dimension at another location very far away. But you're not actually moving faster than light. You have interdimensional travel to get from point A to point B faster than light would, making your trip very short in terms of hours or days And, even Spaceballs did a joke about Star Wars where they fly around in a big camper or RV, because in Star Wars you're pretty much going across a galaxy like you're making a car trip across the continental United States. So the joke was, in Spaceballs they have a RV making a trip over the course of hours or maybe a few days, to make a joke about how the fast ships travel in hyperspace in Star Wars. It's pretty funny. But going back to Battle Angel Alita, no, they don't have a way, or at least they didn't have a way back when the fall or terraforming wars prevented the takeoff of these ships from the orbital station at the time. They had what you know as generational ships. Now, generational ships are something that you see in The Expanse, and they were a concept that was deleted from the Fallout game series that didn't make the final cut. You can find out more about this in the video with Timothy Kane, who was involved in making and crafting the original Fallout and leading the team for it. Just the first Fallout, that this was a concept they had in mind, but it did not make the final cut for when it came to what the story of the game was going to be. In the Fallout games, they were originally going to have interstellar travel over the course of 40 or 50 years to the nearest star and colonize planets over there. Now, since it was 40 or 50 years, a type of practice for this interstellar travel was the vaults. Not only were they fallout shelters, they were also experiments in this rejected concept that people would practice living in a confined environment for decades after the bomb. And because after the nuclear bombs, it's a similar environment that you aren't supposed to leave this confinement out into the real world with the radiation. So in space, you obviously can't go outside of your colony ship. There's space, there's no air, you're not protected at all from the sun or star or whatever star you're getting irradiated by, and so many things wrong with space. Having an atmosphere like Earth does matters, because surviving in a vacuum is not something that complex organisms like humans do. Tardigrades or smaller disease-causing germs, as we've seen surviving a vacuum or near vacuum conditions, are a different story. We're complicated. We're complicated living beings, so we need to be outside of the environment of space to survive and be active. So the confinement of the vaults was essentially a practice run for how people would handle the confinement of a starship or generational ship over decades. Now, a similar idea was in the Battle Angel Alita franchise with Zalem and the city above. So here, as we see in Battle Angel Alita, you see that there's a preparation of sorts with Zalem and the city above it, which is Jeru or Ketheres. And there is a rather plot, or was a plot in the past, that was thwarted by the terraforming wars or the fall, depending on which media for Battle Angel Alita you are referring to. The movie is called The Fall. In the manga, it was the terraforming wars in the past. Zalem and the city above are part of an ecosystem, and we're also part of a plan to prepare for interstellar space travel using generational ships, where you take quite a long time and multiple generations in space to make it to your destination where you were going to go, to a nearby star, which stars are light years away, and you can't only go towards a fraction of the speed of light, meaning that in order for this journey to occur, one would have to pretty much be on there for decades in this long, long journey that is slower than the speed of light, but fast compared to what we do modern in terms of space travel. But still years upon years to complete this journey in an isolated environment, or rather confined environment, if you will. So here in this confined environment, there are elements of the space travel that are incorporated into how Zalem and the city above actually works. Now, one feature is that you have a limited amount of space in the confines of a starship traveling over the course of decades to reach the next star. You have limited space, limited resources in that confined space, even though the starship may be large. So one of the things they do is they have a system in place in Zalem and beyond to limit human reproduction. They do this by rendering the Zalemites or Tiphares sterile. So they don't reproduce sexually. They have to have a machine produce their children. And of course they have sex, but sex is all sterile. Or so it seems, because there's an exception, which I'll get to later. So they built a child, designing the genetic code for them with a device known as the DNA organ. And there are, of course, repeating templates. I mean, there could be, multiple people within Zalem that have the exact same genetic code, but because they're sterile, they don't really have the possibility of incest up there, because it's not them reproducing. It's a custom designed set of templates that the DNA organ makes. And the child is then grown in an artificial type of womb or something that simulates the conditions of the uterus, and they are essentially born from this artificial process and given to their parents. There's a limited number of children parents obviously can have, because they're trying to keep the population from growing essentially, and they try to keep it at a break-even rate. So 1 or 2 children per Zalemite family, or per Zalemite mother, because in that case, even though they don't reproduce, it's a certain number of children per Zalemite mother, but you have a limited number of genetic templates, so you can have essentially what are clones of the same person, because they're people with the same genetic template. You saw this in Last Order, where Lou had another girl with old lady Marge, who had the same genetic template as the older Lou, but she wasn't Lou. But she was essentially a clone in the sense that she came from the same template. And Alita noticed that. So, going on, it's not just a matter of limiting population size, but it also has to do with limiting mental defects in your population. So that will go to the next part of, I guess you call it mind control or mental conditioning. So now, as we talk about population control and the genetic pool they have up in Zalem, here's where we're going to talk about something else. Because, first of all, there is not only a system for keeping people in a limited population in this confined environment of a long-range starship traveling for decades to reach the nearest star and multiple generations of people, there is also sanity or mental control. So the mental control program is, to be rather gruesome, it is a big secret of Zalem. And Zalem does all sorts of extreme measures, including killing people to keep them quiet about this secret. Yes, this is one of the biggest sci-fi horror parts of Battle Angel Alita right here. Well, not getting into a lot of things in Last Order, at least anyways. So, in Battle Angel Alita, to make a person be unlikely to go crazy or feel too depressed from their confined and redundant environment, which is a group of people in a city above the city below, or scrapyard or Iron City below, this city is only a few kilometers in diameter. And obviously, not all of those kilometers are occupied space, and there's a dust chamber. So initially it's supposed to be Star City, but now above, you're isolated for the most part. But all these factors of being isolated, these factors of being confined, would be only worse in space. So what they did is they did this program of brain replacement. Yes, they take your brain out of your head and replace it with a computer. Now, this doesn't seem to work at first glance with the Battle Angel Alita animated film or the live-action Alita Battle Angel film, because they're brains from people who supposedly came from Zalem. It's Sherin in both cases. And I feel that for the live-action film, it is a question of they try to follow the animated film. Which, then with the animated film, it wasn't fully revealed publicly in the manga yet, for those who read it. So, this brain replacement thing is kind of messed up if they want to continue it. There's going to have to be a retcon, honestly. Because that is a big secret. And Destiny Nova became an outcast and left because he figured out about that secret. He figured out he no longer had a brain. Now, the reactions to this whole, I don't have a brain and they replaced it with a computer in my head, also known as a biochip, they vary. A lot of the times the person doesn't survive. So essentially, all these concerns about insanity, the person basically ends up getting stressed out or doesn't want to live anymore because they find out that they don't have a brain and it's been replaced. So, this is a compounded issue. Because not only do they kill people to prevent them from finding out the secret, but just finding out that they've got this system of control causes people to totally lose their mind, for the most part. So there's been a couple of reactions to people finding out. Lou had a temporary, total overwhelming of anxiety when she found out. She's going to be Alita's supervisor in the Badlands. At least she is in the video game and the manga. So that was one case. The other case was Ito. Ito found out that he had one. And he already had issues for being kicked out, so it wasn't him knowing the secret that got Ito kicked out in the manga and the video game. What happened to him in the video game or the manga is he already had a violent tendency that wasn't supposed to be there. So, not only did they have the system of control, but Ito was lucky enough that he didn't find out the big secret. But, on the other hand, even with all these measures of genetic and measures of mental control by having your brain replaced by electronic devices, Ito still kind of lost it. So did Destiny Nova. And Destiny Nova was the third one. And not only did he figure this out, but he somehow survived. The other person who survived went on a homicidal terrorist rampage on various space colonies. His name is Jean Barr. And Destiny Nova is the only case of a person who figured out this secret and is known to have survived the measures where they thoroughly kill people for finding out, so they keep it a secret. So they keep it hush-hush, keep everyone silenced about the truth. And it was after this exile at some point, not long apparently only 1 or 2 years after this, that Destiny Nova actually became a father. Now, as you talk to the population control part, they're built so that they're sterile, but somehow Destiny Nova did it against what he was supposed to do. He also became a father. He also reproduced. We don't know much about his mother, but he has a son. His son is, whether you look at it one way, his son is a hybrid person because it's presumably mixed between Zalemite and human. And his son is also essentially, when you look at it from a Marvel Comics perspective, his son has inborn genetics that give him special powers. So he's a mutant, in the logic of Marvel Comics. And in the logic of Battle Angel Alita anyway. So I made an earlier episode about him called The Mutants. You can check that one out. But either way, it's this insane part that brings it together with Destiny Nova. He is eventually defied all these measures they were using in Zalem to prepare people for an interstellar trip that couldn't happen. It couldn't happen because the tower, or rather elevator up to Zalem, which was in Star City, it was broken. They blew it up during a raid on it. And their space elevator going from Zalem into orbit is still there, but they only carry cargo. They primarily carry human brains to use them as computer processors with Melchizedek up in Ketheres in Last Order, or in Jeru, according to the manga, and the video game, because the video game still went under the assumption that you had Jeru in space. Now, as we saw in the fall, we have a singular big city up in space for Jeru, so the live-action film appears to be going, according to its spin-off material known as Alita's World: The Fall, it appears to be following what the original source was following. But other than that, that is it. That is the purpose of Zalem. And it's a purpose that is kind of lost at this point because the interstellar travel did not happen. Although, for a possibility that they do try to fix what was happening and what went on, there might be interstellar travel, interstellar colonization, because there's probably a need for reform. And as you'll find in the manga, there are eventually moves to reform from this isolationist, being confined to the solar system situation here. Right now we're focused on Mars Chronicle and Alita figuring out and trying to solve some issues back on Mars, but we'll see what happens. There might be an epilogue, a good epilogue, showing what happens. But either way, it's a big story in Battle Angel Alita about how to resolve and how to come to grips and move on from the problems of the past. And that is the overarching theme. Now, hope you had a nice time seeing this episode of Battle Angel Lore. And as I always say, be safe out there, and I will be signing off.